I read 8 books and 1 manga in December, and today we're going to talk about them, and it's a great mix here. We've got science/nonfiction, history, science fiction, fantasy, dystopian / speculative fiction, plus a banger manga. It's all over the map, so buckle up, Buttercup. We're going for a ride. Quick CTAs here. We have officially started the January reads in the Premium Sickos Discord, which is part of my bindery community. The Fantasy Sickos are reading The Black-Tongued Thief by Christopher Buehlman, and the History Sickos are on Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes. So get in on that action with the links in my bio and check out all my other efforts there, including my wife's Etsy shop, where you can get some beautifully crafted handmade bookmarks and more. All right, let's cook with our first book. Let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. The nuts and bolts of this story here involve the United States being overthrown by the patriarchal, totalitarian, and puritanical Republic of Gilead. There's a class of women known as handmaids, which is Gilead's solution to a plummeting birth rate, and they're the baby makers for Gilead's childless elite. We experience this world through the stream of consciousness narration of the handmaiden Offred. So we've got a first-person narrator speaking in the present tense while her past is sprinkled in with the past tense. It's the present tense where we really get the sense of how isolated she is in this imprisonment and oppression. And it's the past tense where we get the sense of her becoming increasingly disconnected to her happier past. This stylistic choice also makes the narrative fragmented and disjointed, while Offred herself is an unreliable narrator, limiting our understanding and trust of the story based on what Offred is willing to share. Beyond that, this is a challenging read for a number of reasons, because the descriptions of essay and how she processes that, there's also the anxiety that runs through the entire text, right? The fear of being caught for something real or imagined, big or small, due to the constant surveillance that she's under. There's also the ambiguous nature of some events that are open to interpretation. This book is not going to hand you any easy answers to the tough questions that it presents. Now, I feel like the strength of this book is also its weakness, because we're looking at this ingeniously crafted world through a keyhole. And while I was happy that we got the historical notes at the end that kind of broadened the scope and explained more of the world, that's also when I realized what was lacking for me throughout. We miss out on so much because we are trapped in this internal monologue. So while this is still a chilling and compelling story that I rated 4 stars, there's something underdeveloped or unexplored about it that I felt was executed better in the show. And due to the show tweaking Offred to be less of a passive character in the mold of John Williams' Stoner and making her more assertive and intense, the dramatic moments paid off better. This was the second book that I've read from Octavia Butler, and she is 2 for 2. So let's talk about Dawn. The concept in this is intriguing as hell and full of crazy possibilities, which Butler takes full advantage of because it gets weird. Basically, there's this big-ass nuclear war. A handful of humans survive. They're abducted by aliens. Lilith, our protagonist, is selected by these aliens to lead the first group of humans back to Earth now that the aliens gave it like a good scrubbing. And these aliens are pretty cool. They're casually curing cancer. They can give you super strength through gene manipulation. They're teaching these humans how to survive when they get back to Earth. And that's not even the weird part, but I'm going to leave that for y'all to discover. The tension in this comes from Lilith's interactions with the aliens, the Oankali, because she has no idea if they're using her for a nefarious hidden purpose, or if this is a genuine opportunity to save humanity and repopulate Earth. And it's hard to figure out where Lilith is mentally at any point because she's a bit scattershot in her actions. And rightfully so. This is a super effed up situation, and the story as a whole is uncomfortable because what's the solution for her here? Like, she can submit and trust that it's all good with the Oankali. And if she doesn't, like, what's the viable alternative to that? So we struggle with that question. And in that way, it's about experiencing subjugation because the aliens know what's best for the humans, supposedly. They know the path forward. They have all the control. And that, to them, justifies their trespasses. That's just one of the themes explored here, but it's the one that stood out the most to me. Now, this is written in a straightforward manner that mostly works. The only place it didn't work for me was some of the dialogue, which at times felt very stiff and formal at times, as we're being fed information to push the story and world building along. But outside of that, right? This was such a solid read and a wild experience that I'd recommend after introducing yourself to Butler's style with something like Kindred first. Switching to the fantasy genre for a second, I did a short form review of Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang. which I repurposed for my top 10 fiction books of 2024. This ranked number 2 among those books that I read last year in the fiction genre. Needless to say that I loved it. This is in the dark academia subgenre, and it explores a ton of fascinating themes that are both worn on its sleeve and are also bubbling just underneath the surface. It grips you from page 1 and does not let you go. If you loved Wang's The Sword of Kaigen, like I did, you should definitely check out Blood Over Brighthaven. It was 5 stars from me. It's a banger. We're going to stay in the fantasy genre here, and we're going to talk about Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and Live Ship Traders is the second trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings world. So while the first trilogy, Farseer, follows the lovable Dum-Dum Fitz in one part of this world, we're separated from that story with Live Ship, but still connected in a way. We also switch from first-person POV to third-person limited POV, which is my preference, and instead of seeing the world through the eyes of one character, we get multiple POVs in this one. As you might be able to discern from the title, we get nautical in this one because a major feature in this is the concept of magical ships that gain sentience once 3 members of a family die aboard them. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy. It is. And I was surprised by how much I bought into this wacky concept and how entertaining these human bodies, like strapped to the front of these ships like a masthead, could be. It's super creative and executed so well with somebody like Hobb at the controls. Now, these ships are super expensive to make, and that has its role in this trading family, the Vestrits, falling on hard times. And this is the main thread, as the POVs we get are pretty much directly involved in this or somehow related. And I'll say to date, this is my least favorite Hobb book, but I also loved Farseer a lot, which I talked about in a video covering the 4 trilogies that I completed in 2024. So the bar is super high, and I love a character-driven slow burn, but there were some storylines here that just bogged things down for me. Now, that said, I'm finishing up book 2, Mad Ship, and I definitely have more of an appreciation for book 1 now, and Mad Ship is a banger. So between that and Royal Assassin, Hobb really seems to crush things in the second books of her series. So while it's on the bottom of the stack, if I were to rank the 4, nearly 5 Hobb books that I've read so far, Ship of Magic is still worth the investment. Switching to nonfiction now, I started off December with Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by Mary Roach. And when I said I was reading it, I had a ton of people telling me how much they enjoyed Roach's work. And I'll tell you, they were right. Like, how do you make a book about what happens to cadavers a fun and lighthearted romp like Roach did with this? That takes some craft. And that's not to say that it's just that. It's pretty doggone informative too. She knows this stuff inside and out. We start off learning about how future surgeons practice on bodies. Then you get into like grave robbing because scientists back in the day didn't really have access to fresh corpses like they wanted. You get into how the body decays after death, how they're used as crash test dummies to improve safety features on vehicles, and you even get into the history of trying to put a head on a different body with varying results. The only mistake I made was I flipped to the chapter on cannibalism as I was eating dinner, and I do not recommend that experience, but other than that, this isn't usually my type of nonfiction, but I was damn impressed by Roach. I did a review for The Greatest Night on my short form platforms, and it's so recent that I'm just going to run the tape on that. Enjoy. This dude was like the medieval knight version of Forrest Gump in that he's just involved in just about every major English event during his lifetime from 1166 to 1219. And in his rise to prominence, he even serves 5 kings. He even becomes regent for Henry III. He plays a big role in the biggest battles of the day, like the Battle of Lincoln. He's a legend on the tournament field. He has a role in formulating the Magna Carta, and he's known for his loyalty, honor, chivalry, martial prowess. He's basically the ideal Arthurian knight. And this biography on him, The Greatest Night by Thomas Asbridge, is not only a history of William Marshall's extraordinary life, it also serves as a history of England's turbulent times during his lifetime, and it unpacks what went into being a knight during this period. This is a popular history that is extremely accessible, making it great for casual history readers while still appealing to more serious readers. If you've read Dan Jones's work, which is meant for a wide audience, that's about the level of readability that you're getting here, which is a compliment. And as the subtitle suggests, this is really a remarkable tale of a young fellow with no land becoming the Earl of Pembroke. And as I mentioned, region of England. This is due to his skill in battle and tournaments, his clever political power plays, his reputation for loyalty, and perhaps some luck in it as well, because he survived some incredibly sticky situations both in battle and in the arena
of power politics. This was the History Sickos Book Club read for December. And while it's not a mind-blowing, 5-star read, it's still a very solid 4 stars and well worth the read.
Let's talk about a book that will always get mentioned when talking about Latin American history. Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent by Eduardo Galeano. This is a book in the vein of Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa in its stated purpose to link the exploitation of Latin America to outside forces, and they were actually published within a year of each other, with this being written just a year before. Now, I won't claim to have enough knowledge on the matter to pontificate on its accuracy, but that's part of why I wanted to read this book, because Latin American history isn't something that I have a firm grasp on. But the argument here isn't one that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'm sympathetic to it. This starts with the plunder that came with Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492. You're talking slavery, genocide, colonialism, nasty stuff. And you work through the recolonization centuries later through tide aid, trade rules, debt, industrial expansion from countries like the US and more, and everything that comes with that and so on. And I want to make clear that I am aware of Galeano's later self-criticism regarding the book, although I disagree with the term disavow used in a headline describing that interview, which wasn't a word that Galeano used in the interview. Galeano expressed regret over the writing style, and I agree. What some consider poetic, I would call heavy, and Galeano deemed it leaden. Regarding the book being about political economy, he expressed that he, quote, didn't have the necessary training or preparation, end quote. Now, I don't have the training either, so I will defer to him there and just say it was probably lacking there. He also expressed that he changed over time and that his views are more complex. And I think this is him saying if he were to write it again, it would be more balanced regarding its political ideology. This, to me, is simply a case of a man that has matured over the next 40 years since this book was published and saying maybe I was a little overeager in these aspects. That's a far cry from disavowing to me, but as a modern reader, I do agree with him on at least 2 of those 3 criticisms. Putting that aside because that's more about a sensationalist headline from the New York Times than about the book itself, even with those flaws, I get exactly what I wanted from this book. And being armed with that information coming into it, I came into it with eyes wide open. This, for me, was a really solid introductory work of Latin American history, and it definitely spurred my interest in digging in further with more modern and balanced works. All right, let's be less serious for a second and throw in a wild card here. For the one manga that I read, I finished the AKIRA series with volume 6. Now, I started scripting out what I wanted to say about this manga, this sci-fi, cyberpunk classic masterpiece, and I realized 2 hours into scripting that out that it needed to be its own video. And it wouldn't all fit into here and not feel weirdly out of place. So I'm going to do something like a rapid review where it's 5 or 6 minutes just dedicated to this. But for now, I'll just say that I love this story. The writing had speed and flow. The art is beautiful. And despite being published from 1982 to 1990, it still holds up today. And I think it would be a great introduction to the genre if you're curious about manga, or even if you're a more experienced fan, because it's such a landmark of the genre. It is iconic. And the film is amazing too. It's an all-timer for me. So keep an eye out for that video and we'll keep it moving here. I also had a similar experience when I was unpacking my thoughts about Cobalt Red by Siddharth, which is a very different book. But this is an expose about the human price paid by those in the Democratic Republic of Congo to mine cobalt, which is a resource that we use to power our smartphones, tablets, and so on. There's a lot I have to say about the concept of this book, which we need more books and research on this topic, but also the execution of the book, which has some heavy-hitting stories, but can read too much like a repetitive travelogue at times. And finally, the reception of the book, which has been mostly positive, I think, but has one big detractor that raises some serious concerns. And I'll unpack all that in another review because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole here. But yes, even with its flaws and controversy, I would still recommend this. It's a sadly unique book. The mining of cobalt in the Congo is not talked about enough. There's zero accountability taken by anybody for the human toll of it all. And again, we need more books like this. So that's my fat stack of 8 books and 1 manga. Comment the best book that you read in December, and I'll see you on the next one. Appreciate y'all.